John Kennedy. Here he is in World War II. His commander-in-chief is Franklin Roosevelt. This is a defining number of years for his soul, and particularly because he is defying his father. And he knows what his father's up to, not just that he's pro-Hitler. He knows the whole thing about the British. 1954, he's in Congress. He's a senator by this time. He actually had toured Asia and India. So here he's calling for liberty as the key to victory. If the West wants to have a victory in Indochina, they should give them liberty. In other words, end the colonial status. Here's his famous speech backing independence for Algeria in 1957. And the title given by him to that speech, Imperialism, the Enemy of Freedom. This shook the world and shook the Arab world and the so-called neutralists and the Africans. It's sort of parallel to the Atlantic Charter almost, but he's not even in power. He's just a senator.
Can you read this?
Oh, no, you read just the first. No, we'll just read the next one here. This is he makes speeches like this all the time. This is what he's doing. So call it nationalism, call it anti-colonialism. Africa is going through a revolution. They want a higher standard of living. They live by subsistence agriculture. They want an opportunity to manage and benefit directly from the resources in, on, and under their land. They want to govern their own affairs. It was in our schools that some of the most renowned African leaders learned about dignity and equality. And he's referring here in particular to his developing friendship for Kwame Nkrumah, the father of African nationalism, who came here to the United States and was here 10 years before he went back to Ghana. We'll get to that in a second. This is more in the campaign. Kennedy, before he was president, after he was elected, sent Senator Frank Moss, the leader of the NWAPA program, to Africa to spread the idea that America is coming in with TVA and like actions. That's the new plan. There was a terrible bloodbath going on in the Congo at the time. And just before Kennedy came in, the president, or the Prime Minister Lumumba, was slaughtered by Alan Dulles, the Belgians, and British intelligence 3 days before Kennedy could take office, because he wouldn't have approved of it. Kennedy is conferring with Nkrumah on the Congo, because Nkrumah is the leader of the opposition to the Imperialists, and that's part of Kennedy's team. He was the first foreign head of state to visit the White House. Do you see the cursor? Or I'm supposed to press this red button? Yeah, this is being greeted with a red carpet at the airport. And they're both speaking, Kennedy and Nkrumah. All right, I'm going to go on. The next month, President Sukarno of Indonesia came, another man denounced as a red enemy, and visited with Kennedy. There he is with Kennedy and Caroline at the White House. And here in 1962, this is the big humiliation for the British. President Kennedy fought the British directly in the Congo because it was the British who were the most important, if not the majority, owners of the mineral resources of Katanga province, right next to Rhodesia. And this includes British lords on the board. It includes the Rothschild family, bankers who are international in Europe and England. And the British sponsored a breakaway of that mineral-rich province of the Congo. Kennedy said, we are not going to allow that. We are not going to allow sovereign nations to be broken up. And with the support, at least the nominal support of the Belgian government, this is the former Belgian Congo, Paul-Henri Spaak was prime minister, supporting Kennedy, so that the British were the only support in public for this murderous secession of Katanga province. Kennedy got the United Nations armed, and they went in and crushed the secession while Kennedy was alive. And that was a terrible humiliation and defeat for the British Empire. And they were writing things at the time about, we're losing everything. Why were they losing everything? It wasn't just this, but you get an idea of this as we see from here now. This is 3 months before his murder. Right after Martin Luther King's speech, there's Dr. King on the left and Walter Reuther over here. So he had the backing of civil rights and labor in the United States. He's working together with the coming up leaders of all of Asia and Africa and South America. And his friends are dominating Europe, except for England. And I don't doubt that he had a lot of friends in England too, who didn't care to just exterminate civilization. Here is the October 11th memorandum. The president plans to withdraw 1,000 military personnel by the end of '63 from Vietnam. There's more on this. This is 9 days, or 7 days before his assassination. What's the real geometry here? To get the idea of this revival of Franklin Roosevelt, let's go over to Europe briefly. Enrico Mattei and Kwame Nkrumah in Africa. 1945, Enrico Mattei, General Mattei, is decorated by the U.S. Army for patriotism for opposing Mussolini, head of the partisans. And in dealing with Iran, he took over Mussolini's old oil company, and they said, take it down. He said, well, why don't we make something good out of it? And so he became the real power in Italy and set up a state oil company that was into other countries as well for the benefit of mankind. He dealt with Iran directly with the Shah, provided a wife for the Shah, undercut the British in all kinds of ways. He's a very clever man. And undercut the consortium that had taken over Iran. The Iran oil companies that, on the so-called American coup, was majority British in 1954, after the coup. And so he would give them, the Iranians, 50% profits. The cartel was going to give them 25%. And they began shipping oil into Italy and working with him. He was pushing hard for nuclear power development. This is 1958. Here he is at the launching of Italy's nuclear power plant, his project. And here he's getting Iranian oil in the mid-50s, after the coup by the British and so-called Americans. Now down into the British West African colony called Gold Coast, which would be renamed by Kwame Nkrumah Ghana, an ancient name. We want a Tennessee Valley Authority type of project on the Volta River. That is the key to our development. What is our development? Not just our little country, but to give electricity to West Africa. And they wanted to make Ghana the industrial center that would give the lead to Africa, with a new harbor and interior communications. This is really important. He was in the United States from the mid-30s into the 40s. When he left America in 1945, seeing the Statue of Liberty through a mist of tears and thinking, "You have opened my eyes to the true meaning of liberty. I shall never rest until I have carried your message to Africa." This is a son of Africa and of the Franklin Roosevelt and Lincoln tradition in the United States. He went to Lincoln University in Pennsylvania and was completely bound up with American civil rights leaders from the 30s into the 60s. When he came to visit Dr. King, Adam Clayton Powell and others visited with him.
Well, Dr. King actually has a speech about 57 about his visit to Ghana.
Oh, he went to Ghana, yeah.
To Ghana for the independence.
For the independence of Ghana,
It's
right.
a beautiful speech he gives. You can look at it.
Yeah, I have to get that. So the project for building this great dam was supervised by Edgar Kaiser. His father, Henry Kaiser, some of you may remember a car named the Henry Kaiser or something like that, but he was the shipbuilder in World War II for Franklin Roosevelt. This is his son that owns the Kaiser Aluminum Company. So their deal is that they're going to organize other companies to make this great electric project with a dam and use it to melt the ore of aluminum, to produce aluminum. This is from the website of the Italian State Oil Company. 5 days before Kennedy took office, Enrico Mattei visited with Kwame Nkrumah. What's that about? And the Ghanaians, Ghana people, I don't know if that's Ghanaians, but they talk about back in the 50s, Mattei sending his people to Italy to meet with and work strategy out with his close friend, Signor Enrico Mattei. So here's the meeting. Kennedy's going to come in office in 5 days. What are they meeting about? Italian engineers built the dam. Americans supervised it. And Kennedy financed it. A constant stream of abuse against this in the papers in London and the United States. Actually, London, in the beginning, they said they wanted to build the dam. And no doubt under different conditions, they might have built something there. In fact, they did build something there. But you know what types of things they do in their colonies. It's not with the same intention. And Nkrumah says, "I want to pay particular tribute to President Kennedy and the U.S. government. The personal interest shown by the President in this vast project means a great deal to me personally and to the people of Ghana." The U.S. government organized the loans and the money to build this dam. And here is, you see the outline of the nation of Ghana. There's the lake. That is the largest artificial lake in the world to the present day. And here is the dam, and you see a portion of the lake going into the distance. When Kennedy was murdered, Nkrumah said that Kennedy had carried on what Abraham Lincoln began 100 years ago, and he didn't just mean ending slavery. This is what Lincoln did, only with railroads and so forth, and steel mills, right? But Africans will remember him above all for his uncompromising stand against racial and religious bigotry, intolerance, and injustice. This is an article back in the 50s by Elspeth Huxley. Her husband, who gave her last name, is the first cousin of Aldous and Julian Huxley, and one of the worst people in that family. That's saying something, yes. And her family, her own family and her husband's, are in the British Empire, both in London propaganda and in Africa. She's raised in Africa as a white overlord. This is about Ghana's dangerous plans. And she writes a series in the New York Times, this British lady. The Great Volta River Project, which will put this cocoa colony on the world map, is to go through. And it will mean cheap power for backward Africa. Assembly lines for ex-cannibals. The scheme may take 20 years to complete. And then she's talking about how it can be disrupted with tribalism and other games. Nkrumah reports plot to slay him. 1958, New York Times. Foreign financed plot is charged by Ghana. 1959. Oh, some unspecified foreign country. Oh, the opposition leader flees to London. Queen visits Ghana. Bombs explode. The day before, 5 days before Queen Elizabeth was to visit here. Third and fourth bombs explode a little bit earlier to her, closer to her visit. Duncan Sandys, son-in-law of Winston Churchill's Commonwealth spokesman. Oh, sorry about that. He was then running Lonro for Tiny Roland later on. Al Gore Sr., father of our Al Gore, went to Ghana. He took over the Senate Foreign Relations Committee's Africa subcommittee. And he was the leader of the opposition to this Kennedy and Nkrumah project. He denounced it as communist. Not meaning that building dams is communist, but that doing this for these people is communist. And that Nkrumah is in the communist orbit. We've got to stop this. There were repeated British murder attempts that were always blamed on the British. In August '62, he cut off security and intelligence ties with the British government. This is a New York Times article that justifies an attack on Nkrumah, murder attempt. And here is an editorial which is about why he should die. He's arrested his opponents, established a tyranny, introduced a totalitarian version of socialism. The children are taught that he's immortal. That's probably the worst thing. They charge British complicity in bomb outrages. Here, his security has been so stripped that he personally wrestles the assassin to the ground after the guy shot at him or threw grenades. Here he is on top of the guy who pulled the trigger. And the British government says, oh, this was not very convincing. Maybe they just staged this. Ghana ends relations with Britain, followed by Nkrumah is reported out after Ghana army coup. He was overthrown in 1966, just after the dam was completed, and that would be less riots. Where was that coup planned? You have to go no further than the New York Times. I'm sorry, UPI. This is in the New York Times. How the coup was planned in London. They give the address. And they say that he's gone and the Indonesian President Sukarno is next. And here's the New York Times editorial to stamp out Nkrumah's legacy. And by what do they mean by Nkrumah? They mean John Kennedy. 1966. It was at this time, 2 months after this, that we founded the LaRouche movement, because of this point of view by the oligarchy in the United States. And obviously India, British, and so forth. here, go back briefly to John Kennedy. This is from 1940. Vast power source in atomic energy opened by science. Uranium is 5 million times as potent as coal. A pound of it's equal to 3 million pounds of gasoline. A natural substance found abundantly in many parts of the earth. I don't know about, what's going on at detail level in the New York Times. But again, we are talking about things that the President of the United States, both, FDR in his time, and as you'll see in a minute, Kennedy, very importantly, puts into the papers. Go back to 1951. The first light bulb lit by atomic energy was from a breeder reactor. This is under Eisenhower, 1955, the Atoms for Peace program. Unfortunately, the Dulles brothers are running contrary, Secretary of State and head of CIA, contrary to the president, and befuddling him in many ways. And you can't have a war against the majority of the world's countries and try to give them nuclear power plants if you're trying to do both at the same time. 1961, April 9th, work on Indonesia. This is John Kennedy, just after he's in office. Work on Indonesia's first atomic project was officially started today by President Sukarno. Project is under the joint sponsorship of the United States and Indonesia. He laid the first stone, 100 kilowatt atomic reactor. The reactor has been provided through a U.S. grant used for training, research, and production of isotopes. This is the program of John F. Kennedy for nuclear power. And it's based centrally on the development of the breeder reactor. Only by the use of breeders will we really solve the problem of adequate energy supply for future generations. This is the report that he asked for from his leader of the Atomic Energy Commission, Glenn Seaborg, a great scientist back in the who I guess you could say invented plutonium back in the Manhattan Project. And Seaborg is a fighter for nuclear energy and a fighter against nuclear war, both with equal passion. So this is the report dated November 20th, 62. Anybody can find this easily. It's not, nothing is covert. Nuclear power promises to supply the vast amounts of energy this nation will require for many generations to come, will provide a significant reduction in national costs for electrical power. They stressed that we are going to have this take the place of oil and coal, and after 2000, essentially all of our new power plants will be atomic. This is, in August of 61, congressional House hearings on the development of the nuclear rocket program for going to Mars, called the Rover Project. And it's interesting to see, there's so many leads to follow up here. Chet Hollifield and other people in Congress were pressing on Kennedy the way, Frederick Douglass pressed on Lincoln. Go faster. Do this faster. This is obviously the future. And I didn't put all these slides on because you're getting tired already. But in the newspapers at this time, day after day, atomic rockets for Mars. You can't go to Mars without this. And of course we're going to Mars and the outer planets. The time is crucial. That's the thing. You have to go faster to make it practical. This is John F. Kennedy, President of the United States, and Dr. Seaborg at the Nevada test site for the rover, the nuclear rocket to Mars. That's the only thing that's what this site was about. This is, again, a widely available photograph. On August 10th, 1963, it was announced that our Atomic Energy Commission was funding a nuclear reactor for Vietnam. October 29th, less than a month before the assassination, this reactor was dedicated by the president of South Vietnam and Henry Cabot Lodge, our ambassador. Shortly afterwards, both presidents were murdered. Forget the misleading headline in the newspaper. This is the operative paragraph. This is a much later article in the New York Times. Dr. Seaborg says, back in 1963, in my first meeting with Lyndon Johnson, a week after President Kennedy was assassinated, he told me to start cutting back. We're not doing nuclear research. We'll do H-bombs, maybe. The Indonesia nuclear reactor was inaugurated the next year. Its first sustained nuclear chain reaction. Scientists from the United States assisted in the experiment. The '64 election, the Republican candidate Goldwater charged that Kennedy had supplied the means for Reds to get an atomic bomb. Does that sound familiar? So Kennedy wasn't putting sanctions on Indonesia for trying to develop nuclear power like Obama. He was giving them the nuclear power. And not just giving it to the nation and some stooge like the Shah, but giving it to his friend and the friend of his daughter in the White House and whatever, the president of Indonesia, who had stamps in his post office honoring Benjamin Franklin and Thomas Jefferson and George Washington. The reactor in Vietnam, this is 1968. The war is going on in Vietnam now after Kennedy's dead. And is that after Bobby's dead?
Yes. Couple of days.
What's what?
Couple of days.
Couple of days after Bobby's dead. They declare in Vietnam, I'm sorry, we can't do much with this reactor because the war is raging all around it. Oh, I forgot to mention one thing. After Truman dropped the atomic bomb on Japan, bombs, he told Acheson that the use of nuclear power for peaceful purposes was a bad idea, because it would likely so cut in to the necessary labor time for the ordinary workman that they would have too much time on their hands and would get into mischief. So I want to just now go back to Kennedy and what he knew when he came into office. Back in '53, Allen Dulles was made head of the Central Intelligence Agency, the brother of the Secretary of State, John Foster Dulles. These are both the lawyers for both Averell Harriman and Adolf Hitler. They're the go-betweens. John Foster Dulles, his brother, was the one sued by my father in New York Municipal Court in 1933-34 for this first case against the Nazis. So that's the Dulles brothers. This is in 1959, and this is an article in the Christian Science Monitor about the establishment of permindex in Italy. It's a co-organization with the International Trademark a trade mart. I'm not going to say, I'm too tired to say the name in Italian. Commercio, whatever. And it says that it's based on the International Trade Mart of New Orleans, and the managing director of that New Orleans Trade Mart, in other words, Clay Shaw, is in fact a member of the board of directors of this new trade center. And it talks about the World Trade Center in permindex. This is a Congo, an established operation by the Central Intelligence Agency in cooperation with all the fascists in Europe, but particularly with the Dulles connection to England. Here is the president of permindex, Ferenc Nagy, former prime minister of Hungary. And he got a building for permindex that had been built by Mussolini as a center for worldwide fascism. They're very much into symbols. And here is the building. I guess you can see it best on the left. It's sort of reminiscent of some other fascist architecture in Italy and maybe the Nuremberg stuff in Germany. And you see the word permindex over there. That's their office. It's supposed to be a company that is running exhibitions and somehow in some vague way associated with expositions in different places. And according to the reports in Europe and here, it was financing the Algerian rebels against Charles de Gaulle, among other fascist projects. The OAS, Organisation Algérienne Secrète, Secret Army of Algeria, threatened the death of Enrico Mattei. And it was said at the time that they had sentenced him to death. Here is the New York Times, September 61. The OAS assassins bombed de Gaulle. The device misfires. A new assassination attempt on de Gaulle, November. Attempted sabotage of Mattei's airplane is attributed to the OAS assassins. This is about the expression that was clearly, again, these kinds of things are coming from the White House, certainly with the knowledge and approval of the White House. Teams of killers. The part of the article you see is how they've left Algeria. Remember, de Gaulle was pro-imperialist. He was a French imperialist. He was in London in World War II. He's fighting fascism. His heart and soul is in that. But he is for the French Empire. He's for France and all that meant. And he changed. Part of the geometry of that change is John Kennedy and Kennedy invoking Franklin Roosevelt. So he told, when he came in as president, at the end of the 50s, he told Algeria, your rebellion is going to be acknowledged by France and you're going to get independence. And this was used by the enemy oligarchy in Europe and England to assemble hit squads and rage. The secret army and their organization ruled over 1 million white settlers in Algeria and got their funds by taxing them, among other sources, like permindex.
A lot of the military that was operating in Algeria were from the French Imperial Army in Vietnam, the paratroopers and others in Vietnam who had lost at Dien Bien Phu and elsewhere.
Right.
And then they went to Algeria to carry out the same tactics with equal success.
The same tactics, and you have to see de Gaulle's mind working, seeing what happened in Vietnam, where the French lost. Kennedy was criticizing the insanity of them trying to reclaim Vietnam after the World War II, and the dissolution of the French Empire around Africa, like in Guinea, where there's a rebellion there, and it's stupid for them. That what the French officers and others in this empire did is they just tried to destroy these countries instead of allow them to have a good relationship with France and Europe. Why not? The French would make money. This isn't about money. Clearly, it's not about money in a place like Algeria. What are you going to do? Mattei could make money out of Algeria by developing Algeria and their oil. That's what he tried to do. It's another reason they're targeting him. So now de Gaulle is the target of this rage. Italy seized Jacques Soustelle, who is the most famous leader of the assassin teams and of the secret army of Algeria. And they're going to deport him from Italy. More attempts to kill de Gaulle. Motorcyclists machine gunned de Gaulle's car while he's in it. Bullets missed him by inches. President Kennedy sent a message today expressing gratitude the French president escaped unhurt. Bidault, Georges Bidault, who was formerly Prime Minister of France. Now he's a co-leader of this assassin bureau. He's an exile traveling around, and he's in Italy when he is expelled from Italy, September 9th, 1962. The next month, Mattei was killed. His plane was sabotaged. The newspapers said it was an accident. And when you have a statement like that, an explanation like that, it is not intended that anybody believe it. It's just like the Warren Commission. The Warren Commission was not really a cover-up. It was bullying, and people stood for it. Because what you're looking at here is in the newspapers all over the world. Why he had to die, an editorial in the New York Times. His bitter antipathy to the major international oil company. He died by accident, but this is why he had to die. He was detrimental to the political and economic interests of the free world. Oh, he was no communist, but then Bidault, after being, expelled from Italy, goes to England, and he is wanted by the French police for attempting the murder of President de Gaulle and the overthrow of the French government. And he's interviewed by BBC. And the Home Minister of England speaks to the Parliament and says, "We don't know that he's here." And the Parliament erupts in laughter. Repeated roars of laughter as he explains, "Oh, he's not really here. Yes, he was interviewed on BBC, but that's no evidence that he was actually here, even though he was standing there in whatever part of London." What's that?
Photographed in Piccadilly Circus.
Oh, photographed in Piccadilly Circus, right? I remember the letter sent by Franklin Roosevelt to Adolf Hitler. I think it was 1938 or something, saying, "Please don't invade," and he made a list of countries. And Hitler read this letter by Franklin Roosevelt, the cripple, to the German Reichstag. He says, "Don't invade this country," and they roar with laughter. He says, "Don't invade Palestine." He says, "Don't invade Belgium." So this is the tradition that you're talking about here with the British. The OAS assassins were based in Spain. The best information we have is that they came from Spain to kill John Kennedy. Here is...
It was in Spain. Yeah, Spain was where Scorzeny was.
Yep. Next slide. Good. That's good.
Sorry.
Hire that man. He says, "I'm not here recruiting ex-Nazis for hit squads."
Present Nazis.
He was Hitler's, I guess you call him Hitler's bodyguard. He rescued Mussolini. He ran famous, brave exploits by the SS and by various...
He was the top commando.
Top commando in the Nazi army.
He ran the plot to kill General Eisenhower.
And he's now in the Dulles British orbit, and he's in Spain as part of this group around OAS and permindex. Now let's get to what did Kennedy know, and when did he know it? This is April of '61. He was inaugurated in January of '61. That's 3 months earlier. He has appointed a commission, and right after setting up this commission, appoints his Attorney General, his brother Bobby, onto this commission to study what's wrong with the CIA.
Well, right in between is the Bay of Pigs.
This is after the Bay of Pigs. Yeah, that's right. But as you'll see, the issue is not the Bay of Pigs. The Bay of Pigs is part of it because there's Cubans and in this whole mess of the hit teams they've got. Dulles denies a CIA role in the Algiers Rebellion. But Kennedy was beginning there a purge of the Dulles group in their combination with these assassin teams. And it says here in the New York Times, and you can always believe the New York Times, that he was reacting to an embarrassing liaison of the CIA with the anti-Gaullist officers who staged last week's insurrection in Algiers. Can you read this? Is Matt, can you read that? Just the one on the right.
President Kennedy is said to have...
No, yeah, right here, just up on the top on the right.
Kennedy had learned of encouragement to the mutineers by the Central Intelligence Agency, which is said to have become a reactionary state within a state in the United States. He fired Dulles in September.
That's the reason. Dulles was fired because he was running, along with the British, hit teams that were assassinating leaders that tried to kill de Gaulle, that murdered Mattei, and were part of all the murder going on around the world against Africans and elsewhere. So this is a war. In August 60, when he's running for president, he made a speech at the graveside of Franklin Roosevelt. I'm just going to give you an excerpt from this. It's on the 25th anniversary of the signing of the Social Security Act back in '35. In this speech, he is proposing an action program as a senator and prospective president to get Medicare going and to expand Social Security to really protect people. I am grateful to you, Mrs. Roosevelt, for allowing me to be here today, for I come to Hyde Park not to instruct but to learn. A visit to Hyde Park is both a pilgrimage and a challenge. We journey here to pay tribute at FDR's grave to one of America's most honored leaders. We who lived while he governed can, here at Hyde Park, still hear the echoes of those heroic struggles. To rescue America from poverty and economic collapse. And the last, the most arduous, the unending struggle, the struggle which his wife still steadfastly carries on, the struggle to build a world free of free and peaceful nations. This is how he concluded this address. The writers of the Declaration of Independence did not promise us happiness. They promised only the pursuit of happiness, and by this they meant fulfillment as a nation and as human beings. It is this pursuit which we must now resume. There are new problems, new dangers, new horizons, and we have rested long enough. The world is changing, the perils are deepening. We must now take the leadership in that great march. And this is why we have gathered here at the home of enduring greatness, not merely to pay tribute, but to refreshen our spirits and stir our hearts for the tasks which lie ahead. We celebrate the past to awaken the future. This was said for all time almost 100 years ago by a great American standing at another graveside at another memorial service. It is, he said, for us the living to be dedicated here to the unfinished work which they who fought here have thus far so nobly advanced. It is rather for us to be here dedicated to the great task remaining before us, that from these honored dead we take increased devotion to that cause for which they gave the last full measure of devotion, that this nation under God may have a new birth of freedom. Today, in that spirit, we pay our humble tribute. That's it.